Marbet. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Conservancy Foundation. And with me today, which is very close to Christmas 2010, is Dr. Janette Sherman, who has written a book, Life's Delicate Balance, Causes and Prevention of Breast Cancer, who has edited a book, Chernobyl, Consequences of the Catastrophe for People and the Environment, and also just recently authored a paper with Joseph Mangano entitled Elevated In Vivo Strontium-90 from Nuclear Weapons Test Fallout Among Cancer Decedents, and a Case Control Study of Deciduous Teeth, which we will get a little bit into as we get further into this. Now, I should kind of lay the groundwork here because our glasses, we both wear glasses, would blind you in the audience. We're not going to wear our glasses, and I have written questions, so I'm going to attempt with my poor eyesight to read my questions and ask as we go through this. And also, we really have a good discussion because we're going to go into all of these creative work that has been done by Dr. Sherman. So Dr. Sherman, thank you for the permission to interview you. Also, we want to thank your daughter and son-in-law for the opportunity to film this at their home in Seattle. And I want to, of course, thank Jim Lockhart, who is the host of A Growing Concern, who came here to Seattle to help put the camera and lighting equipment together. And finally, I want to thank Catherine Chuddy, who is the director of the Oregon Conservancy Foundation, who thought of this idea for us to do this interview. So with that, are you ready to start?
I think so, yes,
Good,
thank
good.
you.
Well, let's begin with Life's Delicate Balance. Now, you wrote this book in 2000, so this book is 10 years old. The original title of the book was Life's Delicate Balance, Causes and Prevention of Breast Cancer, yet I know that you're unhappy with that subtitle. So could you explain to us what the problem is with that subtitle?
Well, the subtitle is Causes and Prevention of Breast Cancer. And we don't know all the causes of breast cancer, but we know enough of them to do something about it. And we have done almost nothing about prevention.
I see.
And that's the thing that distresses me. After 10 years that book is out, and the data are still useful, and still things that we can address but have not addressed, including hormone disruptors, pesticides, toxic chemicals, and nuclear radiation, for which we've done nothing about prevention.
Now, the thing, though, that's limiting on this subtitle, though, is it not, that you really cover more than just breast cancer in this book?
Yes.
I mean, you cover a broad range of cancers and the health effect of whatever the environmental contaminants that you're coming into contact with.
Well, yes, because all of the things that cause breast cancer also cause prostatic cancer, testicular cancer, cancers in children, and other cancers. I mean, it's general things that cause multiple cancers.
And your book really is a very broad overview.
Yes.
As far as all that. Now,
yes.
You've gathered. I've been honored to read this book, and I very much appreciate the fact that you. I of course came in contact with you, and you have given copies of this book to the Oregon Conservancy Foundation so that we can distribute them to the public. You cover a broad range of information: pesticides, chemicals, radioactive materials. How long did it take you to gather that information, to put that all together?
Well, to gather the information is a lifetime of work. But I wrote...
And what is this lifetime we're talking about? How many years did you put into putting this book together?
Well, my first job out of college with a bachelor's degree was with the Atomic Energy Commission at the University of California in Berkeley in 1952. And then after that, I worked for the Navy Radiation Lab in San Francisco, where we studied the effects of thermal and radiation burns.
Okay.
And that was in '54.
What is your educational background? We should probably get this all out in the open so that we
Okay.
know where you are coming from.
Well, I have a bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry, and a
Okay.
minor in history, which I love.
My gosh, okay,
And then I worked for 8 years. Then I went to medical school,
okay.
and then I did an internship and residency after that. But this is accumulated information for many, many years. It took me about 14 months to write the book,
Okay.
and then it took, oh mercy, about another year to deal with the publisher to get the book published without a lot of errors.
As we've said, this book covers quite a range of environmental contaminants or ways that you can become exposed to cancer-causing contaminants. You devote a chapter in this book to exposure from medical X-rays and other radioactive imaging devices. Is this something that the public should be concerned about? And what are your recommendations regarding allowing yourself to be exposed to this kind of radiation?
Well, fortunately, I think that the whole subject of medical radiation is getting press that it has not got before. I mean, the New York Times recently ran a big series of articles on the effects of CT scans and X-rays. We've known for years that every single exposure to radiation, whether it's X-ray or a CT scan or nuclear isotopes, carries an increased risk of damage, whether it's cancer or birth defects or genetic instability or whatever. So every single exposure carries an increased risk. So we want to keep our risks as low as possible. Now, a CT scan can be life-saving in some situations,
Right.
but they should not be used if they are not absolutely necessary.
One of the things that's frustrated me about this concern, and John Goffman raised this concern
Oh, yes.
in his book. I mean, he's written a number of books on this too. But one of the problems that I see with this, and I don't know if you share this, but how does one follow their radiation exposure over time? I mean, it becomes very difficult. They don't. When I go get when I go to a dentist, and I don't allow my dentist to just do annual exposures. I just don't.
That's smart.
And what I say is that if there's an emergency situation here, then I will allow myself to be X-rayed. But when I say, okay, how much radiation am I getting here, I get kind of this general answer that doesn't really give me the specific information. So what do we do?
Well, I think we have to question every X-ray that we have done. And I say to people, don't have the full mouth X-rays done. If you have a tooth problem, then you X-ray
Isolate to the tooth.
an isolated
Gotcha.
tooth.
Okay.
There is no system in this country for people to keep a record.
That's the problem.
I mean, I say to parents, get us some 3x5 cards, put your kid's name on each card, and write down if they've had an X-ray. If your son falls off his bicycle and has to have his arm X-rayed, write it down. If your daughter has pneumonia and has an X-ray, write it down so you know what your exposures are throughout your lifetime. None of us have done that, of course.
Right.
But this is one of the things that I think should be done.
Should be done. And I remember there was an attempt to publish like a small card that you could carry in your wallet that would allow you to write that information in. But I've not seen any of those available to the public.
But we still have paper and pencil.
Of course, part of this goes back to the issue that you raised at the very beginning of this interview, which is the idea that when it comes to prevention, we sadly fail in preventing ourselves from being exposed.
Right.
Now, curiously right now, currently anyway, there's this huge controversy over these full body scanners that they're installing in the airport. So I had to ask you this question because you flew out here from Virginia, and I don't know whether you were asked to submit to one of those scanners, but I think it would be interesting to hear from you what your recommendation would be to people who are asked to do that.
Well, fortunately, I went through the metal detector okay, and I took off my shoes and put my bag on the the role, through the X-ray, and I did not have to go through the X-ray, but I would not have gone through the X-ray. And I recently looked at the TSA exposure, the whole issues about exposure to X-ray at airports, and I recommend that anybody who is within the age of, for instance, 14 and 55, who may decide that they want to have children, or women who might be pregnant, should never go through there.
Really? It's that
Children
serious?
should never go through.
Wow.
And anybody who's had cancer and had X-ray treatment should not go through. Now, that doesn't leave very many.
No, it sure doesn't.
Now, on the flight out here, I managed to talk to a couple of the flight attendants, and I said, what are you doing about this? And she said, well, the pilots are not going through the X-ray, but the flight attendants have not been able to get their union
to raise this as an issue?
to rate this as an issue. And I said they should do this.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is something we should avoid.
Absolutely.
Really.
Yes. I mean, you could, if you get the pat down.
Now, I know we've started out with this discussion about medical radiation exposure. We've talked about now the full body scans at the airport, but really your book is an in-depth. In fact, you devote a whole chapter, which I believe you entitle "Radiation from Bikini Island to Long Island," which is a very interesting title for a chapter. You know what? Maybe you should tell us a little bit about what you have looked at as it relates to that particular part of your book.
Well, I looked at the data that were written shortly after the testing that was done in the Marshall Islands, and in the 50s and 60s, let's see, I worked at Hunters Point Radiation Lab in San Francisco, and a number of the ships that were used in Bikini were brought into Hunters Point, where they were, quote, cleaned up, unquote.
That had been a part of the nuclear weapons testing.
The fleet over there.
Okay.
The data that were published shortly after those tests was very, very interesting, and everything is footnoted in my book.
Right, and in fact, extensively. I'm very impressed with the way you've handled information.
And then, of course, there was this study done on Long Island. Because had a very high breast cancer rate.
Breast cancer, right.
And the one thing they didn't study on Long Island, even though the many, many women who belong to anti-breast cancer groups there wanted to study, was the radiation releases from all the nuclear plants that are around Long Island, which includes Brookhaven National Lab and the nuclear power plants that are in Connecticut and New York State. And the study that was done by the National Cancer Institute ignored it completely.
This was an expensive study, and if I remember correctly in your book, there was a real controversial issue regarding the use of control groups. There was no outside control groups.
Exactly. I asked a lot of civilians, people who are not scientists. Now, if you're going to study the breast cancer issue on Long Island, where would you choose your control group?
Right, and explain the importance of this control group, how this works.
Well, the control group is supposed to be a group that is not exposed to the same factors that the Long Island group was exposed to.
Okay, so you're looking for people
who were not
in the environment that the people who have cancer and live in
Long Island.
Got you.
And most people that I've asked this who are civilians.
Where did they choose their control group?
From Long Island.
Of course. Okay. And of course that would distort the study, would it not?
Well, the thing is, let's say they choose me as a control person, and who does not have breast cancer, versus this other woman who does have breast cancer. But that's not to say that next month I'm not going to be diagnosed with breast cancer.
I see.
So what you're doing is choosing a control group that's really not a control group.
Gotcha.
And they didn't study radiation. And when they studied the pesticides, the only pesticides they studied were those that had already been taken off the market.
Now, this is Long Island. Is there a pesticide problem in Long Island?
Oh, Long Island was one of the biggest, it was the biggest potato growing area in the United States.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Tremendous use of pesticides in Long Island.
Huh.
And now, of course, it's been built into housing and stuff like that. But it was an enormous, it was, I think, bigger than Idaho.
Now, the evidence that you come up with in this book definitely shows that there's a correlation between exposure to radiation as well as these other contaminants and cancer.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, no question.
So there are people who are becoming ill from this and dying from this.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Now, and you specifically go into how those studies show the number of people that were impacted from those exposure levels, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And we used data from, I did not do the statistical analysis. Colleagues of mine did the statistics for me.
Right.
But we used U.S. governmental data. This is data that are collected by our government, by the CDC, which has never gone ahead and analyzed it themselves.
Now
So
why? That's something that I've seen in like, for instance, in the most recent study you've done. There seems to be this, you reference how this has never been done before. This particular kind of analysis has never been done before. Yet this information we've had with us for, what, over 50 years now?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Why are we not looking in depth at this kind of contamination, these kinds of contamination?
Isn't that an interesting question?
Yeah, well, I'd like to hear what you got to say. I'd like to hear what you got to say about it.
Well, I think it's, I think our government doesn't want to know and doesn't want the citizenry to know.
I see.
Now, the data are on the internet and are available for every county. Breast cancer, prostatic cancer, brain cancer, kidney cancer, the whole works.
Right.
And can be analyzed, can be downloaded, but nobody has much done this.
I'm shocked. I find, and even today, this is basically the kind of analysis that we're confronting in our communities.
Well, I'm on the mailing list for CDC, and the most recent one I got was a publication on utilization of outpatient clinics by senior citizens and stuff like that. I mean, it's of mild interest, but far more greater interest is the incidence of cancer. And
when I was reading your book, and I'm a layperson. I'm not a scientist. So when you look at some of these studies that have been done, you have to pay attention to what's being put before you and try and get an understanding of how this is all comes together. One of the issues that jumped out at me, especially from someone like you, who've not only looked, again, at radiation exposure, you looked at the pesticides, for instance, in the Long Island analysis and so forth. Is there, the term that came to mind was synergism. Is there a synergistic effect that you find when you're in environments where you have a number of different kinds of contaminant? I mean, is it exacerbated? What are you seeing?
Well, Rachel Carson described this over 35 years ago.
That's true.
When she said, pesticides and radiation are causing enormous damage and it's not just humans, but also with the birds and other animals.
I see.
And that's what we found.
And you're seeing that in these studies.
We'll see that, and we see it in Chernobyl.
And we're going to talk about Chernobyl too. Now, your book is now 10 years old, and is what I'm reading in this book something that is still relevant today?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And we've ignored it all this time. Finally, we've gotten women to stop taking postmenopausal hormones. I mean, they were touted by the pharmaceutical company as the answer to everything. And we finally have recognized that taking postmenopausal hormones is causing breast cancer.
Right.
They knew this. And these data have been available since about 36, 37.
Where's the disconnect? Why are we having this disconnect?
Well, it sells. It makes money.
Really? So it happens to be that the corporations that are producing this kind of
right,
and we're victims because they are not revealing this information.
Well, we don't ask, and we don't pay attention. And when Premarin came, when a woman got a prescription for Premarin, it came with a package insert. It was about this long, about this wide, with the tiniest
Yeah,
print
right.
that you could possibly look at.
Right.
Now, how many women actually read it? Because it said, taking this product for more than 5 years can result in increased breast cancer. Now, we've known these things, but people are not paying attention. Physicians are not paying attention. And the pharmaceutical companies are cleaning up.
You have a website, by the way. It's JanetteSherman.com.
And Janette is spelled Janette, Sherman, SHERMAN.com.
.com. And it's an excellent website. You have a lot of information on it.
It was designed by my daughter.
That's right, and here we are,
Yeah.
sitting in her house. On your website, you have, I don't know if this is the whole poem or an excerpt of a poem from a woman by the name of Marlene Quint.
Yes.
Now, if I can, or would you like to read it?
No, go ahead and read it.
Okay.
It's a wonderful poem.
The poem is very short, but I think you'll see the reason why I'm asking this question. An awareness was beginning to unfold. In my brain was a germinating seed, causing a disease and then treating it was the full circle of profit and greed.
Isn't that marvelous?
I want to ask you what the significance of that poem is to you.
Well, the same companies that are providing medication to treat, well, and X-ray machines to treat cancer are the same companies that caused much of the cancer. Like much of the X-ray machines are made by General Electric, who is was one of the main purveyors of PCBs.
Right.
And this woman who wrote this is Marlene Quint. She originally from Hawaii. She now lives in California, and she is a brilliant musician and poet and writer. She has her own website, and she is also a cancer survivor and has been an activist in the San Francisco area, trying to stop the contamination around Richmond and around Hunters Point. She's done a really marvelous job.
Now, before we move on, I have to ask you, one of the shortcomings of doing these kinds of interviews, of course, is that, it's not like reading the book. The book is really what says.
I hope people read it.
Yeah, I hope they do too. I've asked you some questions about it. I don't know if there's anything that you would like to emphasize before we go on about your book that you would think is an important thing to say now. I'd like to give you that opportunity.
I think we have to do the same thing they did with Watergate, follow the money.
And you're talking about this from the standpoint of all the
carcinogens
that are in the environment.
And all the harmful chemicals are in the environment. The same companies that make the pharmaceuticals to treat your illnesses,
The pharmaceuticals themselves can be the problem.
Right, but also they're the same companies make a lot of pesticides and toxic chemicals.
Right.
And we need to follow the money. Why is this epidemic not going down? Well, cancer pays well. The treatment of cancer pays extremely well. Prevention pays zero.
When you first sent me your book, you were kind enough. I think you realized I do a lot of I do a lot of research on my own, at least reading a number of different things, and have various tasks that I try and keep up with. You were kind enough to bookmark various sections of your book, which I read, and most of them were relating to the health effects of radiation exposure. But before I came up here to do this interview, I determined it was time to try and complete your book. And so I read all the remaining chapters, and I was very impressed, and I wanted to say this to our audience, that if they do get a copy of your book, I would encourage them to read the chapter entitled, it's chapter 14, entitled Questions, History, Ethics, and Morality, the Global Marketplace. Now, I don't want to take the thunder away from what you say here, but the thing that struck me about this is really, this is a kind of global indictment of what is happening to us in our environment, and the need to apply some ethical standards in the way that we do business, because that's really and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think maybe I'll let you finish this, but I was greatly impressed with this chapter, and I very much appreciate what you had to say here, and I don't know whether you want to add to that or not.
The ethics and morality has to be by the consumer, because every corporation only function is to make money and support their stockholders. I mean, a corporation is not intrinsically ethical or moral.
Right.
So they are not going to be ethical or moral. We as consumers have to say we will not buy these products. We will limit our belongings because we don't need excess
This is
stuff.
where the personal responsibility comes in.
Well, not just responsibility. I mean, I don't want to get into that business. Well, it's your fault because you got cancer because you drank coffee or ate chocolate or whatever it is.
No.
But I think it has to be the educated person who understands what's going on. I mean, I have a colleague in Washington who is trying to fight this whole idea of a large soccer development, because if you realize you've got 6-8 soccer fields, every one of those kids who's going to the soccer field is being driven by a parent.
Right.
And a lot of it is AstroTurf. Now, she is trying to say it's better to have these soccer fields in individual neighborhoods so people can get there by bicycle or walk.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So we have to be aware of what's going on.
Right.
Now, you fortunately live in an area that has decent rapid transit,
Right.
but not everybody does.
That's right.
So we have, as citizens, we have to be aware of what's going on around us.
And that's the purpose of that chapter, is to offer that broader perspective.
Yes, because corporations are not ethical or moral by law.
Well, I again want to let the audience know that we have copies of your book. The Conservancy Foundation does. I believe we'll be posting up the telephone number and email address for the Conservancy Foundation. If you contact us and you would like to get a copy of the book, we'll arrange for that to happen. And I thank you very much for the discussion on that.